Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following.
The Transportation Safety Board releases its final report today on a fatal train derailment near the BC-Alberta boundary 3 years ago. Plus, First Nations delegates feeling hopeful after a 2-hour meeting with Pope Francis at the Vatican. And Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas speaking out about the federal greenhouse gas emissions plan.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Canada's International Development Minister says Russia's blocking of humanitarian aid to Ukraine and its bombing of medical facilities should be the subjects of an international war crimes investigation. Harjit Sajjan says civilians should not be harmed in armed conflict, especially when they're seeking medical aid and food. On his Facebook page, he says, quote, "Ukrainians are already suffering from this unjustifiable war. Now Russia is targeting humanitarian aid. No humanitarian organization, that helps civilians should be targeted by this conflict. Russia's attack on the Red Cross facility in Mariupol is appalling." Sajjan made the comments as a half a dozen of extra RCMP investigators are bound for the Netherlands this week to assist in an international criminal court investigation. The Transportation Safety Board said today that it was brake cylinders worn by age and exposed to extreme cold that failed in a fatal train derailment near British Columbia and Alberta's boundary 3 years ago. 3 Canadian Pacific Railway employees were killed when 99 grain cars and 2 locomotives plummeted off a bridge near Field, BC in February of 2019. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada says the train was parked on a grade when it started rolling on its own and gaining speed. The report says an inbound train engineer had warned of brake system irregularities, but they were not seen as problematic. First Nations delegates say they're feeling hopeful after a 2-hour meeting with Pope Francis at the Vatican. Chief Gerard Antoine, the Assembly of First Nations delegation lead, says despite collective grief and pain, there comes hope for change.
Come and work with us, support us, assist us. It's really important that you acknowledge this wrong. We encourage all global citizens, including all Canadians who coexist with our families, to take time to reflect on this dark chapter in history.
Afghan interpreters who helped the Canadian military gathered on Parliament Hill to demand the Liberal government make good on its promise to help their family members. The government introduced a special immigration stream last year to bring the families of Afghan interpreters to Canada, but those gathered said none have made it here.
In the beginning, the government announced that, we will give 5,000 spots to you guys and make sure that all your family members are eligible to come to Canada. But after 3 months so far, nothing, no movement. I still have family, yeah. My parents are there that I'm trying to bring, and I've been waiting for the last 8 months. Since June, I started on this application, June. It was only December when the government announced that they will give a public policy for our families. Unfortunately, just like every other former interpreters here, they're under constant threat. They're always hiding from house to house, and everybody's, not going out, and they're suffering from financial and obviously all kind of restraints.
2 federal New Democrats have tabled legislation that would make Canadian companies more accountable for human rights abuses and environmental harms abroad. Bill C-262 would give victims of human rights violations by Canadian companies abroad recourse in Canadian courts and would give the corporate responsibility watchdog the power to investigate wrongdoing by Canadian corporations.
Together, these 2 pieces of legislation aim to increase the accountability for Canadian corporations that violate human rights in Canada and abroad. As many of you will know, Canadian mining companies are often registered in Canada, partly because Canada has extremely lax regulations. And so companies, even if they are not actually from Canada, often base their companies in this country. And then when we look at the situation where many countries where mining happens abroad have poor democracies, have weak human rights protections, workers and communities are violated.
What Bill C-262 does, and the short title is the Corporate Responsibility to Protect Human Rights Act, is oblige Canadian corporations operating abroad to do due diligence and ensure that they're meeting the obligations around human rights.
Halo and Hero, the other two emergency helicopter services here in our province, besides STARS, are set to receive additional funding from the Alberta government. Premier Jason Kenney and Health Minister Jason Copping were in Medicine Hat on Thursday to make the announcement. Halo will be given $1 million in a guaranteed contract with Alberta Health Services, and Hero will receive $2 million with a 5-year contract.
Alberta's government, listening to Albertans, has put in place an action plan to improve EMS services and expand them right across the province. We did so in this year's balanced budget, the first balanced budget in 14 years, with a $64 million increase in annual funding for EMS, including a $28 million increase in support for ground and helicopter air ambulance services.
The initial funding negotiations with Alberta Health will continue with our program as we see fit. We want to explore that partnership further and see if we're using the most efficient way of doing so. We'll also be working with Minister Copping's task force on what the best capacity is for the system. However, Halo is open to having our own air medical crew members if that is the best path forward. For the time being, we will continue to operate as we've been doing so for 15 years.
In 2019 and 2020, Halo embarked on 38 rescue missions and Hero flew 62 missions. Well, good news is in store for Albertans waiting for more doses of Paxlovid, the drug that helps treat COVID-19. Alberta Health Minister Jason Copping says as of Friday, the treatment will become available at more pharmacies across the province.
As you may recall, Paxlovid is the first COVID-19 treatment approved by Health Canada that can be taken orally at home. It was first approved for use in Canada in late January, but due to limited supply, it was initially only available at 135 pharmacies across the province. I'm pleased to report that as supply has increased beginning this Friday, any interested pharmacy in Alberta will be able to order Paxlovid treatments to dispense Paxlovid to eligible Albertans who have met the clinical criteria. As a reminder, Albertans who meet the eligibility criteria, which is available only by prescription, must call HealthLink to access the treatment.
Copping also says now that Alberta has dropped restrictions, the potential exists to see a 6th wave if there's a rise in COVID cases. Well, Calgary pastor Arthur Polewski has been released from prison but remains on house arrest following criminal charges stemming from months ago. Angela Stewart caught up with the pastor after days of being incarcerated.
What I went through, it was a roller coaster. The abuse of power I have seen.
Still a prisoner, but in his own home, Pastor Arthur Polewski is on house arrest.
I'm very grateful to be with my wife and my children and spend this time with them, but I'm still a prisoner.
The pastor, who has been fighting for Canadian freedom since the beginning of the pandemic, says he's become a political prisoner following a number of criminal charges placed on him.
What they're doing, they're piling up anything, everything, trump up charges just to keep me under the gun.
Polewski, who had been incarcerated for over 45 days following an incident that took place down at the Coutts border, says the conditions he was under while in prison were unbearable.
I was placed in a metal box. I was stripped naked, searched. I spent many hours, almost every day, on concrete. They incited inmates to beat me up.
The pastor says he was also transferred to an area in a maximum security prison in Edmonton where murderers are held.
People that attack violently guards are placed there in solitary confinement, a segregation. And then I was placed in a mental health unit. as well. I mean, what I went through, you got no idea.
During his time behind bars, Polewski says sometimes he'd even be held in isolation for up to 25 hours at a time. Polewski says everything he has gone through is just a political game, adding he and his lawyer will fight the charges put against him and continue to fight for Canadian freedoms.
I have a trial tomorrow, a first appearance, and I have another one in June. And then there's like a few of them coming up. And we'll just keep plowing. I'll keep telling my story. I'll keep telling about corruption.
For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas is speaking out following the federal government's new carbon emission reduction plan that was released earlier this week. Thomas says the Trudeau Liberal government has missed every target they've set when it comes to their environmental policy, adding this new plan is just going to make life more expensive for Canadians.
Quite frankly, I don't think the government cares. I think they're more concerned about expanding their ideological agenda and pushing it upon Canadians than they are about actually caring for the citizens of this country. And so we can expect job loss. We can expect the cost of living to go up. We've already seen this, tomorrow, April 1st, we're going to see yet another increase in the carbon tax. We're going to see the fuel at the pumps go up. We're going to see the cost of home heating go up. Everything in life becomes more expensive when this government touches environmental policy.
Thomas believes the plan will do very little in terms of helping the planet and will have a big impact on Canadians in the end. Tomorrow is April Fool's Day, and the price at the pump is not a prank. The federal government is raising the carbon tax tomorrow, although Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is removing the provincial fuel tax for the time being. Consumers may not see the 13 cents of savings he's promoted. Nathan Ryder has more.
With the calendar switching to April, the federal government will be increasing the carbon tax. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced he would be removing 13 cents per litre in provincial fuel taxes. But according to Dan McTeague, the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy, gas prices may not drop that amount.
The market and, of course, the carbon tax will take away about 5 cents of that. So best case scenario, you see prices drop to $1, maybe $1.61. A liter of gasoline.
Some motorists were filling up this afternoon at this Northside Gas King location. Many are not thrilled about the federal government's carbon tax increase.
This is as ridiculous as the carbon tax itself, in my opinion. Canada is carbon neutral, so it's just a money grab, in my opinion.
I'm really disappointed. I thought they would hold back till the economy settles down and inflation settles down. But they're going to go ahead with it one way or the other.
It's BS. I think it's not needed. I think he's just trying to milk us dry.
Even those on the same side of the political aisle as Trudeau are criticizing the Prime Minister. McTeague served for 18 years as a member of Parliament in the Liberal Party. He says the government should see the need for energy in today's world.
This is completely unorthodox for that party to continue down that road of being so naive and frankly, not reading the room, not much less the economic tea leaves that are in front of them. Every part of the world is now concerned about energy crisis, and doing their best to get energy supplies to their jurisdictions in light of what's happened in Russia.
For Bridge City News, I'm Nathan Ryder.
Thank you, Nathan. Former Senator Joyce Fairbairn passed away at the age of 82 on Tuesday. Details on her death have not been released, but she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's previously. Here in Lethbridge, Fairbairn left a lasting impression on those she interacted with. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains, her legacy will live on in our city.
I know now she's in a very good place with that disease of dementia. Asking her to stay alive for another 10 years is not fair to her.
Glenn Miller was friends with Joyce Fairbairn and volunteered as her driver for close to 20 years.
So it was a privilege for me to be mentored by her in many ways, based on her experience and life work.
Fairbairn was born in Lethbridge in 1939 and worked as a journalist in the Parliamentary Press Gallery in Ottawa. She later became the legislative assistant for former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau in 1970. In 1984, Trudeau appointed her as a Liberal senator for her home province of Alberta. Miller says Fairbairn referred to herself in the press gallery as the first female newsman.
When they had their annual event, initially she wasn't invited because she was female. But that things has changed. I think she's become a role model for many who have entered in breaking glass ceilings, not just in politics, but in other endeavors. And she can be proud of that part of her legacy.
The Senator Joyce Fairbairn Middle School in Lethbridge opened in 2018 in honor of the former senator. Earlier in March, the school held its Medal of Honor ceremony, celebrating the students that most embody Fairbairn.
They are students who are inclusive, who are academic, who are basically anything you could possibly think of in terms of a well-rounded individual. We honor, anywhere from 5 to maybe 10, maybe more students a year with this special award.
Fairbairn was also inducted into the Canadian Paralympic Hall of Fame in 2011 for the role she played in supporting the sport of Paralympics. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Thank you, Micah. An altercation that began at a Brooks establishment could have turned deadly. Following an argument, a man and his friend left the business located along the 100 block of 1st Street West when they were followed by a black SUV, which then allegedly fired several gunshots at them before fleeing. Brooks RCMP were first alerted when they received complaints of 2 vehicles driving at excessive speed. They located the first driver, who indicated that he was fleeing from a vehicle who was shooting at him. Police have since identified the suspect and charges are pending. Authorities believe this was not a random attack. The Lethbridge Police Service are bringing attention to speeding as we transition from winter to summer roads. According to LPS, in 2020, 25.3% of total fatal collisions in Canada involved speed. Police say there will be more enforcement as temperatures improve.
We will be doing more. With the weather being nicer, we have the ability to set up our laser projects and whatnot. So with the weather getting nicer, we're getting out there more and definitely increasing enforcement on speeders. But we have noticed an increase in speeding. People are getting out their summer cars and motorcycles, and there's definitely been an increase that we've noticed in speeding on our city streets to date.
Well, it's a sure sign that summer is coming. Calgary Stampede officials unveiled the annual poster for the event, which is now just under 100 days away. This year, the Stampede said the annual festival will be back to normal.
It's the relay racing, and at first sight, I fell in love with it. It took a while to discover it. Like I said, I am AT, so I've been making an effort to touch back on my roots, but it was really heartfelt talking to a lot of the riders, and that's when, I wanted to do it, especially photographing. I was right up there against the rails. I was getting yelled at from a few people to back off, but funny story is I got a lot of great photos, met a lot of great people, and it was a great time. A lot of people don't realize how much work goes in behind this painting. If I were to answer you honestly, it's an accumulation of 3 years. I've been in the competition for 3 years, but last year working on the painting, I did about four paintings total. That's excluding the hundreds of little thumbnail sketches and the hundreds of color studies and all the interviews. So it was a very thorough process, but well worth it.
Can't wait for Stampede, always a good time. Well, we started out the day with a few flurries, but ended up with sunshine. But it looks like we could be headed back to double-digit temperatures tomorrow. I'll tell you what's in store for Friday and the weekend coming up right after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, it looks like we could be seeing another 30% chance of showers this evening, along with some wind gusts 20 to 40 kilometers per hour into tomorrow. So after tonight, we're looking at all double digits from here on out. For the next week anyways. Friday, we're looking at a high of 11 degrees, up to 10 on a Saturday. Could see a few showers Saturday evening overnight. Into Sunday, up to 12 degrees. Should be a lovely day, lots of sunshine. Monday, 12. Tuesday, could see a little bit of drizzle there, although lately Environment Canada is reporting that it's only going to be partly cloudy skies on Tuesday. So that temperature, or not the temperature, but that weather pattern could actually change for us. Wednesday, we're looking at a high of 10 degrees with partly cloudy skies as well. So as I said, double digits here on out. Average high for this time of year, 9 degrees. Average low, -4. 21 was our high temperature back in 1964, and in 1967, Lethbridge was sitting at -17. Very chilly for this time of year. 7-Eleven is when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening right at 8 p.m. Loving it. As we look to the west coast tomorrow, we're going to be seeing some showers in Victoria and Vancouver. High of 9 degrees in both of those cities. High of 5 tomorrow in Edmonton with 15 km/h wind gusts. Same thing for Calgary, only a high of 10 degrees with lots of sunshine, but the 15K wind gusts should be present in Calgary tomorrow as well. As we look to the rest of the prairies, we're seeing a mix of sun and cloud in Saskatoon, 3 degrees the high. 5 degrees the high in Regina with partly cloudy skies. A high of 6 expected tomorrow in Winnipeg. Wind gusts up to about 30 km/h there. As we look to the middle part of the country, Toronto seeing rain mixed with flurries tomorrow. High of 4 degrees. Same thing for Ottawa, rain mixed with flurries, 4 degrees the high there, 5 the high in Montreal, seeing mainly showers tomorrow. As we look to Atlantic Canada, Fredericton could see a 5 to 10 centimeters of rain tomorrow, 12 degrees the high there, 5 centimeters expected tomorrow in Halifax, 14 the high there. Same thing for Charlottetown, 14 degrees up to 5 millimeters of rain, and could see some thunder showers there as well. St. John's, Newfoundland, though, 3 degrees. Could see some ice pellets, some rain, some snow, a little bit of everything. This graph was created earlier, so I know the temperature has changed a little bit there since then, but there you go. That is your weather forecast. Canadian automakers say it's not yet clear if consumers are ready to meet goals for electric vehicle sales contained in the federal emissions reduction plan released this week. The government says it will require 20% of all new light vehicles sold in Canada to be zero emissions by 2026, rising to 60% by 2030, with a goal of 100% by 2036. But Canadian automakers say if it wants to meet those goals, those ambitious new sales mandates, the government will need to improve charging infrastructure and educate consumers about electric vehicles in order to meet its targets. The BC government is opening a new office that will streamline hydrogen projects and help the province meet its Clean BC goals. Premier John Horgan says the BC Hydrogen Office will help attract investment and simplify the permits and paperwork required to get hydrogen projects off the ground.
We believe that we have tremendous opportunities in the hydrogen sector. We're well placed geographically. We have the technologies already in place, the feedstock already here in abundance, and there's significant demand internationally for hydrogen breakthroughs, and we're well poised here in British Columbia to do that.
He says 40 hydrogen projects are already proposed or under construction across the province, representing $4.8 billion in expected investment, and more are on the way. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 185 points to 21,890. The Dow was down 550 points to 34,678. The S&P 500 was down 72 points to 4,530. The Nasdaq was down 221 points to 14,220. West Texas Intermediate oil was down $6.65 to $101.17 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 3 cents to $5.63 U.S. Gold was even at $1,937.43 U.S. an ounce. Silver was also even at $24.79 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is $13.47 per bushel, barley is $9.69, canola is $24.93, corn is $11.78 per bushel. Live cattle were down 80 cents to $139.38. Feeder cattle were down 8 cents to $155.90. And lean hogs were down $2.78 to $101.75. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at $79.95 U.S.
An update to one of our top stories. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada is joining the U.S. in calling for Russia to be expelled from the G20. Trudeau says the conflict in Ukraine is Russian President Vladimir Putin's fault, and it can't be business as usual with Putin at the table. Meanwhile, Canada's International Development Minister Harjit Sajjan and other federal ministers are emphasizing the need for international war crimes probe of Russia. Extra RCMP investigators are set to assist in the International Criminal Court investigation of alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity by Russia. Up next, we have an exclusive one-on-one interview with Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. Hal Roberts chats with the Premier about a number of hot-button issues, including the upcoming leadership review in Red Deer next month. He also addresses the doctor shortage in Alberta. But first, a quick break. Keep it right here.
A big event is coming up April 9th in Red Deer. It's the UCP Leadership Review. Will Premier Jason Kenney remain on as leader of the party, or will Conservative members vote to go in another direction? Now, this is a critical time for the party, considering a provincial election is coming up next year. We're pleased to be joined now by Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. Premier Kenney, welcome back to Bridge City News.
It's been too long, Hal. Great to be back. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Now, Premier Kenney, in the past, former Premiers Ed Stelmach and Alison Redford said they wanted around 77 support from members to continue on as Premier. But you've said, I'm good to go at 50 plus 1%. Why such a low percentage?
Well, what I've actually said, Hal, is that in a democracy, majority is 50% plus one. But look, I'm happy to be accountable to our members, looking forward to the leadership review. I think that as I get around the province, the vast majority of grassroots Conservatives know that we have to stay united, keep our eye on the ball, which means delivering on our commitments to Albertans and being in fighting form to defeat the NDP at the next election. And I don't think our members want to go into a cycle of endless division. The PCs did that between 2005 and 2015, even during prosperous times. For Albertans with a friendly government in Ottawa, we had a cycle of 4 PC leaders. We ended up with 2 Conservative parties. All of that handed the NDP a majority government in 2015. We can't afford to do that again. And I'm confident that I'll receive a endorsement. Now, obviously, there are some people that are angry about everything related to COVID, who are angry about the need to have public health measures to protect a catastrophe in our hospitals. Some people who are against vaccines, and they want to have their say, and they will. But I think the vast majority of mainstream Conservatives will want stability, continuity, and unity.
So what lessons do you think were really learned during the COVID-19 pandemic? How may have you handled things a little bit differently during the height of the pandemic?
Well, one thing, a key lesson is Alberta needs to increase our healthcare capacity, which is a painful lesson because we have a Cadillac system in terms of cost, but we're not getting the bang for the buck to justify it. We went into COVID with the lowest per capita number of intensive care hospital beds in Canada, with the most expensive healthcare system in the country per capita. That doesn't make sense. So we are investing even more money, nearly $2 billion additional in the baseline healthcare budget to increase by 50 the count of ICU beds. And we have to hold Alberta Health Services accountable for the failure to provide adequate space when we almost ran out of capacity in a couple of times during COVID. But with respect to COVID restrictions themselves, how we can go back and kind of relitigate everything that happened. I'll tell you this, though. On the one hand, we had this huge polarization and a lot of division. On the one hand, you had people who said, let her rip, be like Florida or South Dakota. Well, they had a death rate that was 3 to 4 times higher than us. Others say we should have been in a hard lockdown for the better part of 2 years, like Rachel Notley, with schools, places of worship, businesses closed, with curfews, stay-at-home orders, cops on every street checking people's papers, which is what happened in parts of Australia, New Zealand, sometimes Quebec. I think neither of those extremes made sense. We tried to navigate a middle ground approach based on the best information available to us that would avoid large-scale deaths, prevent a catastrophe in the hospitals, and minimize the damaging effect of restrictions on people's mental, emotional, spiritual, and financial well-being. And I think Albertans rose to the challenge and did that quite well.
Now, sticking with the healthcare theme, Premier, Alberta's had a shortage of doctors for quite some time. My own family doctor left for Holland because he didn't appreciate the restrictions, both from the province and the Trudeau Liberals, that were implemented. He called it forced coercion to get the COVID-19 vaccine. He wasn't happy about it. So what's being done to bring in more doctors, especially for us right here in southwestern Alberta?
Yeah, thank you, Hal. First of all, there actually are more doctors working in the Alberta healthcare system now than ever before. Last year, there was a net addition of 33 physicians. It's true that some did leave, but some always leave. There's always a cycle, particularly when we're so dependent on immigrant doctors. And so we know that there's an acute problem in Lethbridge. You did have in the past 2 or 3 years, I think about 40 family physicians left, and a lot of that was kind of coincidental. There was no particular reason. Now, I think one of the challenges we have is this. A lot of the younger, newer medical graduates are less interested in making a lot of money, to be honest, and more interested in quality of life. And a lot of them want to live in the 2 big cities for more kind of amenities. Then we have very strong financial incentives to serve in the rural areas. We've just put forward $90 million additional dollars for the roughly 800 rural docs in rural communities. But Lethbridge is neither of those. Like Lethbridge doesn't have the same full spectrum amenities of a metropolitan city like Calgary, and it doesn't have the extra pay offered by Alberta Health in smaller communities. So that's something we've got to sort through. Now, Alberta Health Services is working closely with the Lethbridge community. I think they've interviewed something like, if I'm not mistaken, 18 doctors. They've made a bunch of offers. So it will be an addition. I do know in some areas there has been additional service. Lethbridge for a long time had only 1 cardiologist, now has 4. And so we just need to keep building on that, turning the momentum around. With respect to vaccines, look, 99.8% of the 10,000 doctors in Alberta are vaccinated. So I don't think that has been a widespread cause of doctors not practicing here.
There is a grassroots movement called Take Back Alberta. It's a group led by David Parker, who used to be on your campaign team, I believe, back in 2017. And he says he wants you out as leader. Is this just sour grapes? What do you feel really led to this point?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things, Hal. First of all, even at the height of his popularity, Ralph Klein would have 20% of the members voting to review him have a leadership election. So at any time, any leader is going to have some people in a political party who are disenchanted because of whatever. They didn't get the appointment, the job they wanted, or the funding, or there's always some of that. It's a natural part of a party, of a democracy. But what's different now is frankly COVID, and I think there are some people who were on the letter rip side of the debate who were very angry about any public health measures. I understand their frustration. I'm a freedom-loving Alberta conservative. It was painful for me as a leader to conclude at various times that we had to bring in certain measures to prevent a total catastrophe in our healthcare system. But Hal, my job is not to pander to one faction of my political party. When you're elected to a position like mine, you have an overarching and very serious responsibility to govern for the common good. And I'm the kind of conservative who believes that radical personal autonomy is not the only political value. I'm a pro-life Christian, and I believe that the sanctity of human life, for me at least, is a central value. That caring for the poor and the vulnerable is an essential Christian and I think Alberta value. And also, as a government that has responsibility for the healthcare system, we could not responsibly allow ourselves to be in a situation where we would be pulling life support on people in intensive care, denying care to others, canceling almost all surgeries, and medevacing critical care patients to Toronto. We were within about 10 days of having to do all of that in September. So Hal, I guess I would say this. There are some people who are frustrated about all of that. I get it. There's also people, and I'll be blunt with you about this. There are people who are, in Alberta, we've always had a hard right on the margins. And even in Ralph Klein and Peter Lougheed's day, they would have 1 or 2 marginal right parties that would get 5 to 10% of the vote. The people who are perennially angry and they have a lot of reasons to be angry over COVID. And some of those are people that we would not let run for us. I screened out about 35 applicants to be Conservative candidates in the last election because of extremism. One of the guys running around at those meetings to which you referred, Mr. Beasley from Brooks, wrote on Facebook that Islam is a death cult and that the Mongols should have snuffed out the Muslims when they had the chance. So we have people with views like that who do not fit into, I'll be blunt with you, Hal, they do not fit into a mainstream Conservative party. And some of them are trying to use this leadership review to destabilize this mainstream party. But I'm not going to give in to that because if this becomes some kind of marginal, hard right party that tolerates intolerance of and hateful views of that nature, then then it does not reflect Alberta views. It certainly doesn't reflect my values, and it would be completely unelectable. So yeah, I am going to defend this as a big tent mainstream party, and I will defend the necessity to have brought in COVID measures to prevent a total humanitarian catastrophe in our hospitals.
Now, Brian Jean, who recently won the by-election of Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche, is back in the fold, and he says he's really gunning for your job. Let me ask you something, Premier Kenney. How soon until you punt Brian Jean out of caucus?
Well, the way our caucus governs caucus conduct, and I think that we acknowledge that between now and the decision of the members in the leadership review vote, there's going to be some different views expressed about leadership and about the future of the party. And I hope people recognize just how accepting I have been of different views within our caucus and within our party. We've been, in fact, the single greatest criticism I get from our members is that I've been too tolerant of that we need to get our act together, be disciplined, united, and focused, and not allow for constant internal divisions and distractions. Now, having said that, we have this leadership review process, but once the members make the decision, I will accept it. If the members say they want to move on and choose a new leader, I will accept that immediately and enthusiastically. And I certainly expect that Mr. Jean and others who want a change of leadership would do the same if there's an endorsement of my leadership. So we'll let the members decide. And then beyond that, I will take an endorsement from the membership as my marching orders to ensure that we get our act together, that we stay united, that we're disciplined, and that we get ready for the next election and stop the sideshows internally. And I think our caucus is of one mind on that.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the united front. Many would argue that the UCP is somewhat fractured right now. Premier Kenney, what will it really take to unite the United Conservative Party once again leading up to next year's provincial election?
Well, I think the leadership review is a critical moment, obviously, where we either decide to stay united or to descend into a deep division that I don't think we'd ever get out of. If we were to go into a leadership election right now with all of the passion and anger over COVID stuff, we would sink ourselves into a endless divisive debate about a pandemic, the worst of which we hope and believe is behind us. I think that would be incredibly devastating. You know how there is a small number of Albertans who don't believe COVID was real, who believe that there's some kind of conspiracy around the vaccines. These are not the, look, 90% of Albertans are fully vaccinated, 90% of mainstream Albertans. If we turn this party into some kind of a debate over the safety or efficacy of vaccines, 90% of Alberta adults are going to say, who are you folks? Like, what are you smoking? We can't go into that kind of, as I say, kind of marginal, hard right politics, which is radically outside the mainstream of Alberta Conservative values and perspectives. And I fear very much that that's where we could end up if we go into a leadership review at this sensitive time, or rather a leadership election at this sensitive time. So that's why my appeal is, look, I've been imperfect as a leader, and I ask people to compare me not to the almighty, but to the alternative. I ask people to look at our record. We got through 3 crises while implementing nearly 90% of our platform commitment, and now leading the country in economic growth, incredible diversification, a balanced budget, a stronger Alberta, standing up for parental responsibility in education, the School Choice Act, the Turn Off the Taps legislation, repealing the carbon tax, suing Trudeau on his No More Pipelines law, holding the referendum on equalization, bringing in direct democracy like recall and initiative. We're getting the job done. Let's not turn ourselves into the 10 years of division Conservatives went through before the election of the NDP.
Now, Premier Kenney, you talked about Christianity earlier in our interview. Edmonton Pastor James Coates, Calgary Pastor Tim Stevens, and Calgary street preacher who's done a lot of good work for the homeless in Calgary, Arthur Polewski, all spent time behind bars, were arrested. Premier Kenney, why would the province have Christian pastors arrested, even thrown in jail? Did you not think this would upset your base?
Well, law enforcement decisions are not made by politicians in our system, of course, Hal. We have a system of the rule of law. And let me just say this, Alberta was the only province in Canada that did not prohibit congregational worship through public health policy throughout the 2 years of COVID. And every church I go to and every place of worship, people are thanking me for Alberta having been the outlier amongst the 10 provinces in having kept places of worship open all through and having had the least stringent restrictions on places of worship. We have about 10,000 clergy in Alberta, and 10,000 of them did not get in any trouble with law enforcement. 10,000 of them and their communities, Christian and other, obviously made at least some good faith effort to keep their congregants safe from COVID-19. Unfortunately, there were 2 or 3 people who, for whatever reason, went out of their way to make an example of themselves, very publicly and flagrantly refused to cooperate with any of the public health measures, even physical distancing or mask wearing or anything. So those are decisions that they made, and how no pastor, no politician is above the law. You don't get a pass from compliance with the rule of law because you call yourself a pastor or a politician or anything. Now, in terms of, so as I say, 10,000 of the 10,000 clergy in this province didn't have a problem. You'd have to ask those 3 why they chose to conduct themselves in such a way that ultimately judges stepped in and issued specific injunctions on their cases after months of effort by enforcement agencies to seek some minimal cooperation. In the case of Mr. Polewski, he is, I understand, in the remand center because of his detention for incitement, where he went to a group at Coutts, who we now know, some of whom were heavily armed and have been charged. Those individuals have been charged with conspiracy to commit murder. He stood in front of that group and said, "This is our Alamo, and we should be effectively," he said, "we should be prepared to commit violence and die for our convictions." And so, calling yourself a pastor does not exclude you from the laws that prohibit that kind of incitement. So it's up to the courts, not me, not the politicians, but to our independent judiciary to assess the facts. He has every right to defend himself. He is presumed innocent unless he is proven guilty. He gets legal counsel, natural justice, and due process. But no one is exempt from the legal process in our country.
Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for the great questions, Hal, as always. Look forward to getting back to your program sometime soon.
How would you respond if you were diagnosed with a fatal disease? Well, naturally speaking, I think a lot of us would feel despair and sink into depression. Or would it be possible to rise up in faith and fight to overcome? Well, today's guest is only 20 years of age. Elijah Stacey was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's a fatal muscle wasting disease. He's also written a book called A Small If. Welcome to Bridge City News, Elijah. We're so happy to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you.
Absolutely. Now, Elijah, can you first of all tell us what Duchenne's disease is? When were you diagnosed? How old were you, and how has it affected you?
Yeah, so Duchenne muscular dystrophy, it's a muscle wasting disease that eats away a person's muscles as time goes on. So we started noticing signs when I was about 5 years old. I wouldn't be able to keep up with my peers on the playground. I walked on my tippy toes. Going upstairs was a challenge. These things that were very abnormal for my age. So then I was officially diagnosed with the disease when I was 6 years old. And as time went on, I became completely dependent on a wheelchair when I was 11 years old because I became too weak to bear any weight on my legs. And then later in your teenage years, you start to lose mobility in your arms. So you can't be, lift your arms above your head or anything like that. It's very challenging there. And the worst part about the disease is it's a fatal disease, as you said, and that's because it attacks the heart and diaphragm because those are muscles too. And Duchenne is a muscle wasting disease.
My gosh, that is absolutely devastating. And this has hit your family hard as well, obviously. So 2 of your brothers were also diagnosed with Duchenne's disease. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, that's correct. So my youngest brother, Kai, he's 14 years old. He's in 8th grade. He also has Duchenne, and he's in a power wheelchair as well. And then my other brother, Max, he's 14, but he passed away. So he's in heaven now. But he had Duchenne as well, but he also had other health complications. When he was born, he had a massive stroke that led to him being cognitively delayed, blind, unable to speak, needing a feeding tube, and confined to a bed with a full-time nurse, and my mom taking care of him, when basically full-time as well. So that was my brother Max.
Oh my gosh, that is so sad. I'm so sorry to hear that. Is this disease hereditary?
So the way it works is that, it will be, like my mom doesn't have the disease. So, it is genetic, but it's not hereditary. And so it's X linked. So the mother will pass it down, it's on the X chromosome. And so it comes from her because, during reproduction, the mother will have 2 X chromosomes to put up. And my older brother, he's actually completely healthy and fine. He got the good one, and then the rest of us, we got the bad one. So, but there's a reason, I believe, why we have the disease that we have.
Yeah, and you're so positive, Elijah. You're quite the go-getter, too. And I understand that you started up a nonprofit organization at the age of 15 called Destroy Duchenne. How's that going? What are your goals with this?
Yeah, so Destroy Duchenne, I started when I was 15, and it's a nonprofit that aims at advancing a medical science to cure this disease. So we're trying to raise tons of money to help science and to help minimize the suffering that people face, and that's really our main focus. And so very, very passionate about that, very passionate about business and all those good things. So I have a lot of fun doing that because my overall life cause is to minimize human suffering and propel human prosperity so that humanity can have a better quality of life. So there's all different ways I'm trying to do that, and the nonprofit is one of those.
Wow. And now at the age of 16, you chose physical therapy over surgery. So why did you make that decision?
Yeah, so I went to my doctor, and my spine was starting to curve more and more, and he started to advocate that, you need to have a metal rod inserted into your back. And I didn't want a metal rod inserted into my back. And so that was just terrible news. So I'm going back and forth with my doctor. I look over to my left, my mom's crying. My dad has his head down. That's what he does when he's sitting there smiling because I'm not accepting this news. I do not want a metal rod in my back, and I'm saying I'm not going to have the surgery. So I asked him, hey, can I just not have the surgery? He said, you could, but as your doctor, I got to really point to you having the surgery. I got to put my foot down. You got to have the surgery. So the time goes on again. And then I asked him again, I said, so if I was able to reverse the current state of my spine, could I then avoid having to get the surgery? And he said, well, I don't want to give you any false hope. I've never seen this being done before. It's basically medically impossible. But because I know you, I will give you a small if. And so from that day forward, I went to physical therapy, did intense stretching and all kinds of things like that. Worked out all day. I hung a picture up of my x-ray so I can get in the right mindset every day. I even taught myself how to cook in a wheelchair. So I'm driving the wheelchair with one hand, holding up a pan in the other hand, going to the stove, right? I'm doing all of that. And 3 months later, I go to the doctors and my spine is straighter. I don't have to get the surgery. All it took was a small if. It took that possibility, that small chance, and I worked with it and made it happen.
Oh, wow. And of course, A Small If is the title of the book that you wrote.
Yep. And really, my whole life, as I wrote the book, I could see a small if, throughout my whole life. These things that I'm not supposed to do with small possibilities and then go and make it happen.
Oh, gosh, that is absolutely amazing. Now, in your book, you write about something that you call an adapter's mindset. So can you maybe explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so the adapter's mindset, it's one of the lessons in my book. There's a lesson at the end of the first 13 chapters, but this lesson, the adapter's mindset, is all about being in the mindset that no matter what comes your way, you're going to adapt to it. Right. And so being in a wheelchair, I had to adapt to get in and out of my bed by myself, went to the bathroom by myself, getting in the shower by myself, right? You have to adapt to it because it's going to be a lot harder than just to stand up and do it, right? And sometimes the way you have to adapt though was swallowing your pride and asking for help. That's a key way to adapt. But the whole mindset, the adapter's mindset is to be open to being creative and to being open to however I got to make this happen, I got to make it happen. That's the adapter's mindset. It's just a take no for an answer and just find a way to make it happen.
Gosh, that is amazing. What a strong individual you are, seriously. So what's the difference between controlling something and influencing it? And which one is better in your opinion?
Well, yeah. So I don't think there's necessarily a better one. I just think the benefit of this is to recognize the difference because it frees you from stress and emotional bondage to things. So controlling something is to be able to determine the actual outcome of it, right? You can absolutely control the outcome of it. Where influencing something is you can affect something, but you can't necessarily control the outcome. And what I would say is that you got to focus on what you can control and disregard what you cannot. And a majority of things are not in your control. And so when you realize that, it really frees you from a lot of the stress and stuff. So for example, the example I like to give people is, let's say I want to make somebody like me. So I'll be very nice to them, polite, take an interest in them. But at the end of the day, that's not in my control. They may not like anybody, so they may just, not like me as well, right? And that's not in my control. But all I can do is try and influence them to like me and be a good person, be nice to them, right? And so that's the difference between the two. And I think when you really realize that, it really helps you in your life, having this disease and the challenges that come with it, knowing what I can influence and knowing what I can control is very important to keep myself in a healthy state of mind.
Yeah, totally. Now, in your book, you talk about using negative energy as a motivation, which I think is really cool because you've experienced some bullying and you've also experienced people not believing that you'd be able to, heal yourself or get the spine, I guess, straight. Or maybe talk a little bit about that, using that negative energy as motivation. How does that work?
Yeah, so I call it rocket fuel. I call it rocket fuel in my book. And basically it's when somebody doubts you, right? They believe that you can't do this or that. That's free motivation to go prove to yourself that, no, I'm right about myself. You say I can't do this. I believe I can do it. I'm going to prove myself to be right, and I'm going to prove you to be wrong. And that's what that's all about. So it's free motivation. And the way I like to think about it, it's like, it's a classic example of like using evil for good. We read it in the Bible that God is constantly taking evil and then using it and turning it into good for his purposes. And so it's that similar thing. And that's really what I've been trying to do my whole life. I turned my wheelchair into my advantage. I turned this power chair into a power chair, right? That's what I like to say. And so, you have to use you got to turn your disadvantages into your advantages. And so people being, putting their insecurities on you and doubting you and trying to tear you down, that's just free motivation. That's using negative energy for a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I mean, you brought up your faith. So as a person of faith, how do you reconcile your suffering or your disease with your beliefs?
Well, so like I said, I believe that God gave me this disease for a reason. I think that there's a reason that he wants me to have this disease. And what I realize is that, being in a wheelchair, it draws more attention to myself. Let's keep it honest. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. If I'm living my life as Christ and I'm being a Christ-like example to people and I can go and tell people about them, they're going to remember me more than if I didn't have the wheelchair. The wheelchair is just more memorable. It's different. And so that's a really powerful message there. But not just that, the credibility behind it. The Bible deals a lot with suffering. Jesus spent a lot of time healing people that had, some type of illness or whatever. But not just that, but people with suffering. He consulted with them. And I think that, having the suffering that I have, it makes me very credible to say that the Bible is the solution to people's problems. It will lead to the fulfillment and joy that you are seeking. The things of the world will not do that. You seek after money, you seek after fame, you seek after these things of the world, but you still feel empty. You're still searching. But when you have God, he fills that emptiness inside of you. It's a supernatural thing. That's what I believe, at least. And I just think that the wheelchair and the suffering that I go through it allows me to communicate that effectively to people that may not know it.
That's amazing. Now, in your book, you have many lessons, and one of them that you teach about is self-image, and I'm sure that you've gone through that yourself. So why is self-image so key, and how can a person build up their own self-image?
Yeah, so the self-image is, how do you view yourself, right? And how you view yourself is going to relate to how you act. And how you act is how other people are going to see you. So it's very important that, okay, well, how do you see yourself? So if you see yourself as timid and shy and maybe not so confident, you're probably going to act that way. But if you see yourself as a confident individual, you're probably going to act confident. And thus people are going to think you're confident. And that's going to be just a loop of positivity and reinforcing that self-image. So if somebody wants to change their self-image, they have to think about it. Well, what image do you want? What do you want to be? You want to be a confident person? Well, think about times in your past as proof of when you were confident. Maybe you raised your hand in class and nobody else did. That may be small, but that's all you need to get going. So then you say, okay, no, I do have some confidence in me. And then you can visualize and really think about it mentally and just kind of go through it. Visualize yourself thinking about being confident and imagine yourself in a certain situation. Maybe you're talking on stage, or maybe you're going to go approach somebody that you normally wouldn't approach, right? That right there is how you're going to build that self-image. And then, as you practice it, you're going to become more and more aligned with that new self-image that you want.
That's amazing. So many good nuggets in this book, but you also write about the need to be self-sacrificing. So what's that all about?
Yeah, so that lesson highly influenced by my faith, right? That just to start off, the Son of God came down to sacrifice His life for us so that we could be saved, right? So that right there tells you something, that sacrifice is important. But I think that the world today is too selfish. I think people are way too selfish within their friendships, romantic relationships, and just the way that we deal with people within our communities. I think that we need to self-sacrifice from time to time. And I think that would make things a lot better. If I, for example, have a friend and they want to go to a movie and I want to go to a basketball game, I can sacrifice going to this basketball game so we go to the movie because I know that they will enjoy it. And I think that kind of sacrifice will lead to just a much better world. And I think that we need to stop focusing so much on ourselves and focus on other people.
Mm-hmm. I think people need to hire you as a motivational speaker because you're definitely energizing me for sure. You are an amazing young man, and thank you so much for sharing your amazing story with us, Elijah. We're so happy that you could come on with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been great talking to you.
Elijah Stacey is the author of A Small If. If you would like to find out more about Stacey's organization and get a copy of the book, just go to destroyduchenne.org. It's right there on the screen. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.